So this is the fifth talk in the series about on the theme of self, non-self, and it carries on the journey in which we not only try and meet ourselves, but it's quite ambitious. We're also trying to awaken from the dream and learn about Buddhism and go to pieces at the same time. So the title of the talk is Falling Apart but Waking Up. And it's very well acknowledged in the Dharma that to deeply meet and understand and be familiar with anatta, the inherent lack of an enduring self as a thing that stays as a thing, that it's actually very difficult because it's behind every experience. It's inherent to every experience. It's part of every experience. So it's not easy. And in one of the texts, there's an image that says you can work and work and practice and go to teachers and spend years, and it's like doing the laundry. That you wash the clothes and wash the clothes and wash the clothes. Now, there's something left. And in India, in a couple of thousand years ago, they used to wash the clothes with cow dung, the shit of cows. And so what's left? Rather a bad smell. And so the Buddha said, just like when you washed and washed and washed the clothes, you still got a bit of a bad smell left. So if you work and work and meditate, you'll still have a residual leftover sense of self, because it's actually so hard to really get to the root of anatta, get to be totally familiar with anatta. So, you know, you can feel okay now, supported, when you're struggling and you still feel a self, and you've been to this retreat and you still feel me, and you've been to another and 20 retreats and I still feel me. So don't worry, it's not an easy task. But as I said last talk, a little bit goes a long way. However, the Buddha also gave some help on this, and he said that in the end, one really kind of radical and effective way of cutting through the illusion or seeing through the transparent me is to actually look and ask, what is a human being? And when you look carefully at such a thing, what is a human being? All you find is pieces. You actually don't find a human being. And it's really interesting that what we did yesterday in the guided meditation, for example, looking at how many beings we are make us up. We are, and that's on the mental level, just on the level of description. We are male, female, old, young, we work at this, we work at that, we have a family, we have a definition of a national identity, we have a definition of a kind of person that we are, kind of direction that we take, we have a definition of psychological personality, we have self-definition, we have other definition of how others see us, and it's all coming and going like a kaleidoscope all the time. And it's really difficult to say who we really are, because there's so much of us, and there's so many of us packed into this body. And the body itself, like we said, who can say what is a thing called a body? If I go to the hairdresser, the barber, and the barber sweeps away the hair after cutting it off, I don't say, oh, there's me being swept away into the rubbish bin. Stop, stop. So we decided that's not body, this is body. Now it's body, there it's not body. Same with everything. The fingernails, the cells, the tissues, are they me, are they not me? Do they make us up? We are totally integrated into the world, and we keep the world, we take in the world 3, 4, 5, depending if you're an American Westerner or you're a poor Indian, maybe 5, 10 times a day in food, or twice a day in food if you're a poor Indian. But we take in the world that builds us. And without it we would be very quickly dead. The world is passing through us, so we're just a mechanism for receiving the world and letting it through us. So we don't even have a body that we could say is separate. So I'd like to read a story about this, which is in one of the suttas. And the story goes like this. Suppose there was a king who had never heard the sound of a lute. A lute is an oud, or guitar. Never heard the sound of a lute before. He might hear the sound of a lute and say, what, my good men, what is that sound? It's so delightful, it's so tempting, it's so intoxicating, it's so thrilling. And they would say, sir, that's called a lute, whose sound is so delightful and so tempting and so intoxicating and so thrilling. And the king might say, so go and fetch me that lute. And they would fetch the lute and say, here is the lute whose sound is so delightful and tempting, intoxicating and thrilling. And he would say, no, no, I don't want that thing. Fetch me the sound. And then they would say, this lute, sir, is made of numerous parts, a great many components. And it's through the activity of all the components that the sound is made. It's depending on the body, the skin, the neck, the frame, the strings, the bridge, and a human being who plays it with human effort. And so this lute, made of so many parts, sounds because of the activity of all its different parts. And then the king will get angry and split the lute into 10 pieces, 100 pieces. And having split the lute into 10 or 100 pieces, he would shave it into splinters of wood. And having shaved it to splinters, he would burn it in a fire. And having burnt it in a fire, he would reduce it to ashes. And having reduced it to ashes, he would throw them in the wind, or let them be washed away by a swift flowing stream. And he would say, a sorry thing is this lute, whatever a lute is, by which people have been so completely tricked and deceived for so long. In the same way, a meditator investigates form. However far form, shape, being, would go. He investigates feeling, he investigates perception, he investigates sankharas or constructions, he investigates consciousness, however far consciousness may go. And as he investigates form and feeling, perception, constructions and consciousness, any thoughts of me or mine or I am don't occur to him. So this brings us to what you might call the Dharma Truth, or the Dharma teaching on the aggregates, in Hebrew, mitzarfim, that we're made of pieces. And this is kind of the science of the Dharma. And when the Dharma looks at a human being and sees all these pieces, there is some kind of description of what they are. And this is a teaching that's from the very earliest days and the very first talks of the Buddha to the end, and it carries on into the Mahayana tradition, the Tibetan tradition, and it goes all the way through, because it says, here is a human being, but the human being is illusion. Really, the human being is made up of parts or pieces, and here is what they are. And it goes to the most well-known sutta, perhaps of all, is the Heart Sutta. And the Heart Sutta, maybe you all know the beginning of the Heart Sutta, which is that form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, but not only that, it says form is nothing other than emptiness. Emptiness is nothing other than form. But it also goes on, if you read the Heart Sutta, from form to perception and Vedana and Sankhara and consciousness, Vijnana. So the Heart Sutta is about the 5 aggregates, the 5 pieces, if you like, components of the human being, saying that they are just passing by, they're not things either. They are basically empty, fundamentally empty. You can't describe them, you can't catch them, you can't really hold them in your hand. And what goes with it is a very fundamental teaching of the Dharma, which is the only thing that creates a human being, or creates an aggregate, or creates a thing that we say is an experience based on selves and subject-object, is the tendency to hold on, to cling. And that's why whenever they talk about the aggregates in the tradition, it's always the aggregates based on clinging, on holding on attachment. And it's attachment that makes a self, and it's attachment that makes a human being. And it goes very far. It says, because of attachment, we are born. We're here in this embodiment because of attachment. It goes, we wouldn't be born without attachment. In other words, there's something that wants to be born, and we're born. We suddenly find ourselves in a body. Oh my God. How did that happen? I thought I was going to be forever free, bodiless. And I'm here again, boom, arrived in samsara. But we can't blame anybody except ourselves, because it's attachment and the continuing of that we keep going with that attachment. We keep saying, yes, there's a lute, and the lute is the source of sound, and here it is. I see it, it's a thing. And we forget that it's because of our attachment that we define a lute as a lute, and we don't see it as all the different components in the universe that create this moment of beautiful sound. We forgot because of attachment. So I'll go back to that during this talk, but it's just put that at the back of your mind. It's only attachment that in the end is the force that creates illusion, and it's the letting go of attachment is the power that liberates us, nibbana. In the end, it's just that. So defining a human being is a process of attachment. And we think, wow. What about the question like, well, someone must have made me, or why am I here then, or where do I come from? It looks so obvious to ask these questions. And the Dharma says, these questions are from the devil. And I want to give you another quote, which is so lovely, which says just this. So one time Mara, who is the kind of the devil, or should we say, the voice of conventional attached reality, who keeps turning up, by the way, in the entire life of the Buddha too, just like in our life, always turns up. He never just disappears. He's always the voice of, should we say, conditioning, conventional, regular, ordinary human thinking that keeps turning up again and again. So Mara comes and says, by whom was this being created? Where is the maker of a living being? Where has a living being come from? And where does the living being go and finish? And a nun, and that's just to show you, by the way, that right from the earliest days there were female nuns as well as monks. The nun, Sister Vajira, says, Mara, what? Do you assume a being? Do you take such a position? It's like, you've got a view, you've got a view. This is purely a pile of constructions, of fabrications. No living being can be pinned down here. Just as when, with a whole collection of parts, we use the word chariot or car, even so, when the aggregates are present, there's a convention of a being. In reality, only dukkha is what comes to be. Only dukkha is what remains, and only dukkha is what falls away. Nothing but dukkha comes to be, and nothing stops except dukkha, suffering or dissatisfaction. And then Mara became sad and dejected and says, Vajira the nun knows me. And he vanished. So let me briefly go through, and I must say, interestingly enough, that yesterday I received a note from one of you that quite out of the blue said, please tell me about the aggregates. But I also had other hints by other ones of you who were not human beings saying, oh, if there's too many Buddhist details, it goes over my head in your talks. So, but I got this little note, so I thought, I've got permission. And then today I got a note saying I don't need to know anymore about from the same person. But anyway, I hope to explain it quite briefly and without being too much a spokesman for Buddhist concepts. But let's just look at them briefly, the 5 aggregates. And I must say, personally, I found them really, really helpful in direct experience, meditation experience and daily life experience, to cut through the illusion of self directly, personally, as an experience, that irreversible experience for me personally, and for many others. So I can say it works. So the first is Namarupa. Namarupa, really translated as Nama is mind, name, the same word, and Rupa is form or physicality, materiality. So you can call it materiality, mentality, or mind, body, or name and form, different translations. And rupa is elements, the earth, air, fire, water. Rupa is the only part of the aggregates that is the physical part, the physical reality, the so-called physical reality. And nama rupa as an aggregate, it's quite similar to science. Because science does exactly the same thing. Science looks at the body, and I know because I used to work as a scientist, and I have a doctorate in biochemistry, and we were taking tissues to pieces and saying, well, all a cell is a bunch of biochemical reactions. There's nothing left. Without the biochemical reactions, there's nothing there. Now, science is actually confirming it. And science with rupa is also saying you can't find anything out there, because a thing is created by looking at it. Quantum physics says there is no independent reality that is separate from an observer looking at it. The looking creates the thing, along with something, which in quantum physics is a potential. So there's a potential, and the thing is only made when it's seen with certain eyes that look at things in a certain way. So right from the very beginning, science says the same thing as the Dharma here, that there is no absolute independent things there at all. The world is made in the looking, by the way we look, and that's attachment. There's an interesting book called The Ego Tunnel by a philosopher and a neuroscientist called Thomas Metzinger. And he's he's been sitting retreats with Charles in Switzerland. He's a professor at Switzerland in Zurich. And he's done a lot of interesting studies on the self. And one of them is lovely. He beams a three-dimensional picture of you. He takes a picture of the person and beams it 2 meters in front of the person sitting there. So like the picture, the photograph, it's a three-dimensional hologram. So it looks like the person, and it sits there in front. So he asked the subject to sit behind the picture of themselves, the image of themselves, three-dimensional, and kind of meditate. And they look at themselves, and slowly they begin to be there and not here. And it takes an hour of meditation, if you like, to jump from the body, being in the body, to being inside, and then someone comes and taps on the shoulder of the image, and the person goes, oh. So, and this is published in all kinds of scientific papers and so on. He did a lot of games like that to show that the self is a flexible, just a concept, and it can change, it can jump, it can be other places, it doesn't have to be here. And it's kind of obvious, what's in the Christian world said, and Jewish world also, when someone dies, dust goes to dust. That's all. The body is just dust. We're made of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. Is it ours? Carbon belong to me. Pachman is mine. And when I was in university in Oxford, one of the questions in the exams, the Bagrut in Oxford, was how many molecules of Caesar's last breath do you breathe in every time you take a breath? And they gave certain details, like how much air there is in the world, and how many molecules there is in one breath, and how big is the average lungs, and so on. They gave a number of details, and then you are meant to work it out. But you do come to an answer, which is that every breath you take, you are breathing some molecules of the last breath taken by Julius Caesar 2,000 years ago. So we're breathing in each other. So you know, science is very clear. I've been endlessly grumbling at scientists, and I've written articles that no scientist wants to read. That you've got in your hands a knowledge of awakening. Science does have a knowledge, but no one really applies it to themselves. They just keep going and applying it to the world and not really thinking what a amazing, amazing kind of power of deconstruction and of awakening exists in science. But science doesn't want to take it to look in the mirror as the scientist. They just look at the world and keep going, looking at the world, and forgetting that it applies to them. It's actually on my website. I have one of the articles. It's called "The Scientist is the Subject, Not the Science." Anyway, we are made of the world, and that's Nama Rupa. And it's one of my favorite stories in the ancient texts is a story of a monk that was kind of a good meditator. So he had contact with all kinds of spirits and gods. And he had this burning question: where is the ending of the elements of earth, air, fire, water, the materials of life? Where do they finish? Where are they gone? And he went up to the gods and he asked the question, I'm really curious, where do they finish? There's none? And the god said, I don't know, ask the other gods. And the other god, he went a bit higher, and those gods said, well, we're just looking after the god kingdom, we're the gatekeepers. Go to ask the ones who live inside. And he went up another level, and they said, I don't know, go and ask Brahma, the biggest god. And so he went to Brahma, and Brahma said, I'm the biggest god, I know everything, I'm super, I'm amazing, I'm the biggest, I'm the best. And the monk said, I didn't ask you that, actually. I wanted to know, where's the ending of materiality? The earth, air, fire, water, the elements, where do they finish? Where are they not there? And Brahma answered, I'm the best, I'm the biggest, I'm the most fantastic. Well, I've heard that already, said the meditator. This I know, you told me already. I want to know the answer to a question. And the Brahma said, I'm the biggest. He couldn't say anything else. And the monk said, well, it's clearly, and the Brahma said, the truth is I don't know. You better go back down and ask your teacher, the Buddha, he'll tell you. So he went back down to the Buddha, and he asked the Buddha, and the Buddha said to him, you're asking the wrong question. You can't ask where is the ending of earth, air, fire, and water. But you can ask, where do they not land? Where does earth, air, fire, and water not land in the consciousness? Not make an impression, not arrive in the consciousness as a truth or a thing? And that is much more a question that you can answer, and you can look at it. And it's much more what we're talking about. Observing, it's the observer that makes reality. And if earth, air, fire and water, physical reality don't land and aren't observed in that way, with conditioning, with attachment to physicality, then they don't land, they don't arrive. The second is perception, and we talked about it already. And again, if we are able, like in the Bahia Sutta that we mentioned already, to sense the world directly, immediately, spontaneously, without processing it, without letting it land in us as chains of concepts, of hearing the sound without creating from the sound a theory called a lute, a guitar as the source of the sound, a construction in the mind. But we're just spontaneously meeting the moment. That's non-constructed, that's non-attached. It's timeless. In the Sutta Nipata, it says quite painful quote, which says this: for some people, contact, the point where senses and objects meet, it's thrilling, it's captivating, and so they are washed by the tides of being. Tide is from the moon, the sea going backwards, forwards from the moon. They are washed by the tides of being, drifting along an empty, pointless road. But others come to understand the activity of their senses, and because they understand it, the stillness fills them with delight. It's a beautiful quote. The senses are what we know, are how we meet the world. And if we stay with clarity of the senses, there is stillness and there is endless delight. But if we are enthralled, meaning captured by the senses, this is this, and this is that, and this is me, and this is my problem, and this is their problem, and this I don't like, and this view is this, and the construction and attachments we build in the world, this is leading us to an empty, pointless road, washed by the tides. The third is Vedana, which we also discussed already, liking, not liking, or pleasant, unpleasant. And actually, this might be the easiest place for us to see the aggregates and the way we construct things. Because liking, not liking is very immediate and very clear. We turn towards the taste of the food today like this, the taste of the food tomorrow like that. Tasty, less tasty. Pleasant, more pleasant, little bit less pleasant, maybe half pleasant. No, the cooks did well, but not as well as yesterday. That's how we navigate through the reactions to the world. And if we see the way we build constructions, it's not so difficult. How we build a construction called, I like this, from a taste, or from something pleasing the eye. Oh, I'm quite attracted to this person sitting nearby. And to be honest, it gets quite important when we go through difficulty, illness, suffering, or death, to be able to separate pleasant or unpleasant sensations from the constructions that we make around them. Even here as we sit in the hall together, we have, most of us, pleasant and unpleasant sensations in the body. And pain in the body we can build huge stories around it. We can continue it, we can be busy with it, or it can be just an unpleasant sensation and a pleasant sensation, which actually doesn't go very deep. It's just the senses. Sankhara is the fourth. Sankhara is the constructions, the fabrications, the tendencies, the labels that we put on ourselves, the way we label a thought, the way we are, we own things, my thought, me, the way we have a personality which is predictable, the way we look at the world and describe it and define it. A sankhara is when I look at this thing and say microphone, and I recognize it, and I'm not interested in the little bit of air here. I see immediately my attention is here. If I hold a cup, or hold a paper, that's where my interest is. I'm holding something that I want and I have a relationship to. I don't hold nothing or something else. I have that one because that's what's relevant. So it's patterns, habits of constructing the world, sankharas, and they go deep. And the fifth one is consciousness, vijnana. And here it's more subtle. Can we separate the self out of consciousness? What does it feel like? And if you can imagine it, even for a moment, what does it feel like when there's knowing but no knower? And taking the self out of consciousness. What might that be like? And it's actually not, it may seem on the one hand very difficult, on the other hand it's not that difficult. We can imagine just resting in awareness, where there's no need to be somebody who knows, who is owning that awareness. We don't need to look through a lens called me at the world. We can just feel knowing is happening, doesn't belong to anybody. Awareness is happening by itself. This is something that needs extended practice. You might feel it and know it briefly, but for it to really be part of you, it does need extended practice and quite a long relationship with the practice of meditation or awareness. So it's something that grows. The more you can touch that place of an unpersonal knowing that doesn't belong to anybody, that just is awareness on its own, the more that grows and develops. There's an image, a nice image also in the text, when someone asked the Buddha about consciousness, and the Buddha asked back and said, "Tell me," he asked the monk, a light going through the window and hitting the wall on the other side of the window. Light comes through the window from the sun and hits the wall on the other side. Now, if there was no wall, what would happen to the ray of light? And the monk said, well, it would just hit the ground on the other side, behind the wall. So the Buddha said, well, if there's no ground, well, I suppose it would hit maybe some water on beyond the ground. And if there was no water and no ground, where would the light land? And the monk said, well, I suppose nowhere. And that's the point. That, I mean, if we look at it now, can we see the light in this room? None of us can see the light in this room. We can only see the light reflected from objects. we don't see the light itself. We see the result of light that lands on us, and then I see a person, or a ceiling, or a floor. But the light itself, I don't see it. So it's similar. The Buddha said, in that way, consciousness usually lands, nochet, in us. And then we say, I know the world. Just like the light lands on objects, and then we say we know an object, but we don't see the light. And that's usually what happens. But when it doesn't land, it's actually freed. It's liberated. And this text says it's a matter of habit. We usually feed consciousness with the nutrition of habits, sankharas, tendencies, habit of saying this is that, and this is the world, and this I know, and this I want to know, habits of what's interesting for us. And so consciousness takes shapes according to what's interesting for us. And if none of it, if we don't feed that tendency, consciousness then takes no shape. It doesn't land anywhere, and it's liberated. And that's the sense of knowing with no objects, with no subject, with no knower, a liberated knowing, a liberated awareness, which is ultimate. It's all built by karma. Karma keeps putting us in this body, bringing us here, dumping us again and again into this world. Here we are again. I'm born in a body, born in a me. The aggregates arrive. I believe them. I believe there's a lute making the music. Here we are again. It's karma doing that again and again. Karma is the image, is the field. Consciousness is the seed that's planted in the field. And our craving or wanting or impulse or attachment is the food that we give the seed. And then it's growing in the field of karma, which is us. Well, it's quite... You may also say, well, wait a minute. There's a lot of teaching in the Dharma about what I have to do. But if there's no me, what do I have to do? Why do I have to sit and meditate? And the answer is that temporarily we need a me as a convention to get us to a retreat. Hopefully in the retreat we can let it go. But we need a me to get here somehow, to make a intention. So there is a concept called becoming, bhava. Bhava is when grasping and attachment happens, the building of a self. The building and the construction of a self is called becoming. We become somebody. And it's an illusion, like we said, and like the nun says. There is no being really, but for the moment let's have an agreement that there is a being, so that we can go to meditate, so that we can practice. And the Buddha said it's okay, because it's a desire. Becoming is okay as a movement, which in the end we can let it go. But for the moment it's often helpful. So it's not that we have to do a fight to cancel out every character that we are and every one of the personalities that we are. We don't cancel it out. We just gradually replace it with wisdom. We just gradually open and see it's not real, including all constructions, even the Dharma itself. Why did this phrase, when you see the Buddha on the road, kill him, the Bodhidharma phrase? It's because at a certain point you don't need it anymore. You don't need to be a Buddhist or a meditator or become a practitioner. But for the moment, it's okay. It's at least the best kind of person that you can be. So the Buddha said, okay, but it's all right. Be a practitioner for the time being, because it's the best thing you can be. It's better than being a number of other possibilities. And the Dharma is a raft. It's called a raft, rafsoda, that you only need it until you cross the other side, and then you actually don't need it. You can throw away all the teachings you've ever had. You don't need them anymore. Anyway, they all pretty well go soon. I don't know, when this is up in YouTube, these talks, they have to compete with like 100 million other bits of either wisdom or stupidity. And they all in the end go into some cyber rubbish bin. So it's okay, they'll pass by too. They're all so made of components and bits and pieces. So if craving is the issue that keeps the whole illusion going, craving, attachment, then, and that's the root, that's the seed that's planted, that's the watering of the seed that's planted in karma. So how do I stop craving and attachment, hitsamdut, heachzut? And the Buddha's teaching is quite wise here. It can't be done by force. It can be done by just not feeding craving or attachment. You don't need to fight against attachment that you have. You need to be wiser than that and kinder than that, and just not keep feeding it. Don't give it fuel and the fire goes out. The word nibbana, awakening, means the extinguishing of the fire, putting the fire out. The fire goes out when there's no fuel left. We just don't need to support craving, but we don't need to actively stop it, fight it, because that's another kind of selfing. We make ourselves the battleground, fighting inside ourselves the attachment that we have to this or to that, or to being me, or to being this thought. And how much this is very fundamental psychology. If we have a psychological sankhara, like a problem with self-image, it doesn't help to fight ourselves and say, I mustn't have this in, I mustn't have this thought, I must stop thinking like this, this is not useful to me. It just keeps going, except we feed it with negative thoughts. Instead of that, we can just let it go. We just not feed it. We just don't go there, we don't need it. We let it just pass by and not engage with it and not give it interest. And it disappears. We just don't give it interest. It's just not interesting anymore, this thought, I'm no good, of self-image, or any other thought, or any other formation or construction. Just take away the fascination, the thrilling. It's no longer fascinating for us to hold that thought or description or definition or construction. That's nibbana. Nibbana is cooling the fire. things just come to be. Things are unborn, unmade, unformed, unconstructed. That's the awakened mind. In the tradition, and I think you can understand this also from your experience, the question is asked, how do you recognize an awakened person? And everything you might think here doesn't quite work. Is an awakened person shining? Well, shining is a quality, so if you can say the shining person is shining, but that's not awakened, it's a shining. So is he or she full of knowledge, or is he or she a certain atmosphere, or all of that is like the light that we don't see, but landing on objects so that we see. They're qualities. If they're qualities, we can define them. If they're defined, they're not awakened. They're definitions, they're descriptions, they're already formed. So the answer is, an awakened person is not findable. You can't pin them down. You can't find an awakened person. You can look them straight in the eyes, you cannot find an awakened person. They are unfindable. There is no description that is suitable or possible. And when a monk asked the Buddha, said, well, I don't understand that. I don't understand how that works. And the Buddha said, because awakening is beyond all descriptions, no language is useful anymore. And therefore, no descriptions or no possible definitions work anymore. So therefore, you can't find an awakened person even if you look at them. The awakening is not findable. And it just is that sense, it's beyond the normal definitions and descriptions that we have of the world, because they are constructed. They are like the light landing. They are like the story of the monk and the Brahma. The question is not where objects don't exist, because something exists. The question is, they don't land in the consciousness as objects, don't get formed as objects. And it's very, very, very mysterious here. It gets to be very, very beyond and subtle, and also very close, because I think that we also don't need to think of the awakened world as so far away, as beyond, as above, as only if we totally disintegrate like the loot our world, we have to fight everything. It's not quite like that. It's if we look at the source of the light in us that knows things, if we just look at this awareness itself, it doesn't have labels in it. The attachment creates the labels and the constructions. But the power of knowing that we have is by itself non-attached. It's just awareness. And there is a real help to us. When the Buddha was enlightened, the first words he said were, "I've seen you, house builder. You will not build this house anymore. I have broken the rafters, I have broken the beams of the house is collapsed." And he meant by that just this, that the constructions are, it's a constructed thing, it's not ultimate reality, it's the constructions that we make. And he saw through it and he said, this is stopped. These constructions are not needed anymore. then everything that we see, again from the tradition, everything that we see just becomes a metaphor or an image of the unfindable, of the ultimate, of something that we can't pin down, of something that doesn't land in the consciousness, of some source that is not visible. Thank you.